Welcome back. We're looking at exercise 15-1 from Murach's PHP MySQL. This one will modify the registration application that we worked with as you read through the chapter. As you can see, it's got a whole lot more fields. And we'll be working with regular expressions and doing some data validation. So let's jump right into the exercise. Step 1, it tells us to open the exercise and run it. It's found in your exercise starts, chapter 15, exercise 1 folder. And I ran it and I put in some test data just to speed up the video. But I made one slight change onto the password. I changed the input type to text for password and verify password, just so you can see what I'm typing in. You definitely don't want to do that. I've only done that for the video purposes, so we can see how the validation works. So here it is up and running. Step 2 says test the application by putting in some data. And to validate the credit card, use that test visa number, which is 4 followed by 15 ones. And we'll see how this works with failures and a successful registration. So here's our failure state, where if I do something that's not valid, I get a little red warning. And if I fix this, make it 2018, and submit it. Good, those two are good. I just need to fix my password now. Then we'll see the success state. So here's password with some uppercase, a number, a lowercase, and an underscore. So this should all be valid. When I register, it looks great. I want to see if I can still, yes I can, resubmit data. Okay, great. Moving on to step 3, it says open the index.php. We're going to look through all the files here. In the index.php, basically we set up all of our fields that we're going to be working with. This is all the fields from the form, so the email, the password, the first name, last name, etc. It gives us the message for the error state. Okay, and then we've got our two different actions that we can do. We can do an action of reset, which sets all of the variables to the empty variable. We've got a register action, which takes all the inputs from the post, from the form, sets them into variables, and then we call our validation functions on those variables. So that's what the index does. Now if you didn't read chapter 14, this might look a little different because we're doing a little bit of object-oriented programming. So what we have here is we have a validate class. That's inside the validate PHP. And what a class is it's a way to group functions together. So we've got all of these functions defined inside this class. So a text, we've got a pattern, we've got a phone, an email, and so on. These are all functions that validate those different types. And they're stored inside this class. So how we access them is we use the keyword new. So we do a new validate. Validate was the name of our class. And we store the result of that into a variable validate. Now when we want to run one of those functions, we use our variable, give it the arrow, and the function that we want to run. So here's our getFields function, and when we do our validations below, it's validate arrow email, validate arrow verify, and so on. So that's how the object-oriented portion works. So we've taken a look at index. We took a brief look at validate. It just has all those functions defined in it. One of the nice things, if you look at all the different functions, they're all defined the same way. So the first field is the name for all of them. So text, first field is name, pattern, first field is name, phone, first field, or first parameter, I should say, is name. Second parameter is value. For phone, it's value, pattern, it's value, text is value, and so on. Third one is whether that item is required inside or required for validation, and all of them have that required as the third parameter if they take required. Pattern's a little bit different, but we'll look at that later. But all of the basic ones that we use from the index.php, notice they don't use pattern, but all of them that they do use follow that same pattern of the name, the value, whether it's required, and then yes, name, value, and required. Okay, last file we want to take a look at is register.php, and that just prints out that PHP or HTML form. Great. Moving on to step 4, where we actually start modifying code. In step 4, we're in the validate.php. It wants us to update the phone and the zip and change this digit pattern to the \d. Either one will work. The \d is a little more common to see, so that's probably why they want us to use that. And to do step 4, it's just as simple as finding these blocks of digits and changing them to \d. So we do that for phone. We also do that for zip. Here's state, here's zip code. Change the digits to \d. And again, digits to \d. I'm going to modify this one just for a second so we can see that the validation is still working. Now that it's saved, I'll reload, and I should have gotten a validation error. Oh, I should have put it on the first one. There we go. Okay, so now our validation failed because I'm saying I want 6 digits and I've only got 5 in my zip code. So I just did that so you can see validation is still running. Let's test. We also did phone number. So if I change this to 999-000, which doesn't match our pattern anymore, if I register, I'll get an invalid phone number. But as soon as I switch that to 4 zeros, which follows our pattern, and register, then it accepts it. Okay. Step 5 is a little more complicated. It wants us to modify the password method. So where's our password? Here's our password method. And it wants us to switch it so that the password must be at least 8 characters long. So if you look at the text function or method, one of the parameters, 1, 2, 3, the fourth parameter is the length, the minimum length. And what we have currently is we have a minimum length of 6. So we'll go ahead and update that to 8. And down lower we actually use that 6 again, fix that to 8. One other place that is used is in our index.php. We have a message up at the top that says password must be at least 6 characters. Let's fix that one to be 8 as well. Okay, so back to our validate class and our passwords. And it tells us in step 5 we want to make sure that it contains at least one uppercase and one number, but we don't care about lowercase or the special characters. So we'll just comment out these 2 requirements, special case and lower, save that, and reload. And you'll notice we have a message that we need to fix because this one's saying still requiring upper lower digit and a special characters. So we'll fix that to say an uppercase and digit, no special case, special character, or lowercase. Okay, so now our message is fixed. Let's test it out. If I have a password that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that would make it 7 characters long. If I do that, it says it's too short. Okay, great. So I'll put it to 7 characters, or 7 digits and an uppercase. That should be 8 characters total. And when I register, that validates successfully. One of the interesting things they've done with this in the solution folder is they've commented out the lowercase. I think that's because the regular expression gets a little complicated if you want to require a digit and an uppercase and allow lowercase. So right now, let me try to resubmit this and get my form back. Right now, if I put a lowercase on here, as we had it at the end of step 5, so this is how we had it, where it only requires digit and number. If I have a lowercase, I actually get a validation failure because I have a lowercase. So I think that's why the solution file has that uncommented. And they didn't fix the the regex to allow you to have extra characters. They just left it to require a digit and a uppercase character. So anyway, that was long-winded, but I think this is what they're looking for the solution for task 5. Moving on to task 6. Modify the index.php file so that address, city, state, and zip fields are optional. If you remember, we were just talking about how all of the functions, the validation functions in here, take 3 parameters. The first one's name, value, and the third one is whether that field is required or not. So if we go to our index.php and find the inputs for address, city, and state, here we have address. We just need to add a third parameter that says it's not required for address, city, state, and zip. Okay, so now if I'm going to get some form validations, just make sure I get something, and this doesn't submit. So when I register, I can take out address, city, state, and zip code, and I shouldn't get any error messages about that, which I don't. I've only got them for my password that I've purposefully mixed up. Okay, great. So address, city, state, and zip are working. Let's look at step 7 is to add a birth date field after phone number. Okay, so we've got phone number showing up. Let's add a birthday field here. So we need to do that in our HTML. Here's phone number. Copy that so that we have a birth date. And we'll use a birth date variable. And the field will be birth date. Okay, once that's saved, I'll register again. Oh, I did something bad. Oh, because I don't have birth date defined yet. But my form printed out the form with birth date. It kind of died because I'm using this variable that's not defined. We'll go ahead and go define that in the index. First, we need to add that field. So fields, add field birth date, and as it tells us in step 7, use the month, day, year format. Okay, so now we've got that as a field. Let's add a default value for birth date. So on the reset, we'll get birth date equals blank, and we'll also grab birth date from the filter input. This is going to be birth date. And then we'll want to validate that as well. Validate birth date, birth date, birth date. There we go. Then we just need to define this birth date function inside of our validate. I'm going to put it, where was that expiration date? I'll put it right next to that one. Exp date. Okay, here it is. I'll put it right underneath there. We'll define this as public function birth date, name, value. And I'm going to borrow some from another function. Expiration date's actually a little complicated. So, actually, expiration date is a little more complicated than I want. Let's borrow from phone number. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we do want to get the field of our name and store that as field. Yes, that's right. Call the text method, so we just make sure that we got a value posted. If it was blank, then this would give us an error. Okay, we didn't get blank. And then we want to do some pattern matching, kind of like we do on phone number. I'm just going to paste this in, and then over on the side we'll talk about how this actually works. Okay, so we've got this long pattern in here. Let's put this in Notepad and kind of break down what this is doing. So first, we can see they wanted it in month, month, day, day, year, 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 year format. So we've got different sections of this regex, and they're broken up by the \/ that's an escaped slash, so I'm just going to break it up here so we can see that a little better. So this first section of the regex validates the month, and what it's saying is it should be a number. It can start with 0, the question means it's optional, and be 1 through 9. So that would be either the number 1, the number 2, and so on to the number 9, or it can be 0, 1, 0, 2, so on to the number 09. So that's the first case. I should have made these similar to 9. And then we've got the OR sign, or it can be 1 followed by 0 to 2, which means it can be 10, 11 to 12. So it can be any of these formats. And that's great for months, because months should be 1 through 12. And so it can take the format of with the preceding 0, or the number by itself, or it can be a 10, 11, or 12. And that's what this range gives us after the OR. The month is similar to that. Again, we have this 0 optional, 1 through 9, so that gives us this section. Sorry, this is the day section. So for days, we get the option of using 1 through 9, or 0, 1 through 0, 9. And then we've got the or it can be a 1 or 2, followed by any digit, which means it can be a 1, a 10, 11, 12, and so on up to 19. Or it can be a 2, 0, 2, 1, and so on up to 29. So that's what our second part of the regex means. And then similar to what we had for the months, we've got a or. It can be a 3 followed by a 0 or 1. So we'll also allow 30 and 31. So that regex works for months, or sorry, for days inside of months. They can go from 1 to 31. What this doesn't handle is if you put invalid dates like February 30th in here, the regex would match, but I think it's good enough for the purposes of the exercise. Okay, then we've got our slash, and we've got digits for the year, and this is what we've seen before. This is just a 4-digit year. As long as the digits are valid, then it would match. Interestingly, they didn't put a range on the year, so you could put anything from 000 to 9999. And that's according to the regular expression. But the second part of step 7 is to make sure that this date isn't a date in the future. So we'll go ahead and write the code for that. PHP has this nice class that's called a datetime. So we'll say our birth date equals a new date time, and we'll give it our value. Remember, this is the value that's being passed in, so it'll be in this format. PHP is nice because it can parse just about any date in this kind of format. It can get interesting when, let's say, we have 0707 or 0701 in 1980. If we get a date like this can be a little complicated, because in Europe, they would write that as 0107, which is the day, month, year format. But PHP can handle both of these based on the culture it's running in. Since we're in the US and we downloaded the English US version of XAMPP, we should be all good to go. If we're running this in a different culture, we can possibly run into date issues. We'd want to test it and make sure it's working for the culture that we're targeting. Okay. So we've got our date time as our birth date. Similarly, if we use a new date time With no value, it'll give us the current time, and then we can easily compare these. So if birth date is greater than now, that means your birth date is in the future. That means, well, that's an error for us. We'll set an error message. Birth date can't be in the future. Sounds good to me. Okay, and then we'll return. Okay, so that works for our birth date class. Let's go ahead and test that out. I'm going to get rid of this notepad. Reload this page first. Since I fixed it and added a birth date field into the index, now the form works. We'll go ahead and add a birth date in here. 11/11/19. Actually, I'm going to say 2020, just so we see our error case. If I register, phone number. I did something wrong in the register. So birth date, get field birth date. Okay. In our index PHP, did I do something silly here? Birth date, birth date, birth date. Since I did copy the phone number, I probably mixed up inside our validate. Index, I said birth date and birth date equals input post birth date. Okay, I'm going to pause just for a second and figure this out. Okay, that was my bad because I copied the phone number. I had the input named phone, and I meant to change that to birth date. Okay, so now let me copy that back, put our bad phone number in, 888-999-9999. That's our good phone number. So our birth date should fail to validate. I fixed it this time. There we go. I just needed to reload the page because it still had the old form there. Okay, so now our birth date's failing to validate. I'll put our phone number back in. I don't know why I lost that. There we go. And so phone number is still validating. Great. Birth date is validating that it's not in the future. Let's put it in the past, and birth date should validate there. Great. Okay, last one is to update the email function inside the validate.php. And you'll notice this starts on line 75 and goes to about 139, so it's 60 lines long. It's a pretty long function. Well, PHP actually has a built-in validator for emails, so we're going to go ahead and use that. One thing we can't do with the built-in function, though, is customize the error message we get. So if you look through this function, we've got all kinds of error messages, like an @ sign is required. If they didn't put in an @ sign, we can say the username part is too long. We have this restriction that the username can only be 64 characters. Looking further down on, we've got invalid username if that doesn't match some regular expression. We've got an invalid domain name if that doesn't match some expression. But if we use the PHP built-in validator, we only know if it's valid or not. We don't know what's broken if it's not a valid email. But I still prefer the built-in PHP one because I don't want to write validators for those other fields. So we'll go ahead and say use the PHP filter validate email input filter. And to do that, we'll say email equals filter var with the value filter validate email. Great. And what that will return, it'll return a value if it does validate against the filter, and it will return false if it doesn't validate. So we need to check if email equals false. That means it didn't validate with PHP's filter. And we can say field set error message. All we know in this case is that it is a invalid email address. We don't know why, but we know it's invalid. Else field clear error message. Okay, great. And then that's all we need, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines instead of these 50 other lines. So I'll clean that up. Deleted, saved, okay. Let me disable that color changing. Okay. So this was validating our email address. So I'll go put in an invalid email address and make sure we get a validation error there. If I click register, yeah, I've got an invalid email address. If I use test.com, then it's great. If I use some other country one, example.co.uk, that should still validate just fine. And it does, so we're good to go on the email. And that's it for step 8. I'm going to go ahead and make sure these other fields validate, and we still get our good. Oh yes, I left the lowercase digit requirement on. And if I meet all the requirements, I still get success. So that's the end of exercise 15-1.